The crimson sun hung low over the Montana horizon as Nora Lawson watched her family's ranch burn to ashes, the flames licking hungrily at the last remnants of the life she'd known. It was 1878, and at 22 years of age, she had just become completely alone in the world. "My life is over," she cried, her voice barely audible over the crackling inferno that consumed the ranch house her father had built with his own hands. The tears streamed freely down her dirt-smudged face, cutting clean paths through the soot and grime. "It's only beginning with me," came a deep voice behind her. Startled, Nora whirled around to face a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. A cowboy stood there, his hat tipped slightly forward, casting a shadow over his features. When he stepped closer, she could see his eyes a startling blue against his sun-weathered skin. "Who are you?" Nora demanded, quickly wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. She didn't want strangers witnessing her grief, especially not now. "Drake Yates," he answered simply, his gaze moving from her face to the burning ranch behind her. "I was passing through when I saw the smoke." "Too late to save the buildings, I'm afraid." Nora turned back to watch the last wall of her childhood home collapse. "They're gone," she whispered. "Both of them. Influenza took Pa last week and Ma couldn't bear it. Her heart just gave out this morning." She gestured helplessly at the fire. "I was boiling water for tea when the stovepipe caught. Everything happened so fast." Drake removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mississippi."
Lawson.
"Nora Lawson. Miss Lawson." He nodded solemnly. "Do you have family nearby? Somewhere to go?" She shook her head.
"No one."
"Pa moved us out here from Boston when I was just a girl. Said he wanted to build something of his own." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "And now it's all gone." Drake was quiet for a moment, studying the dying flames. "Night's coming on," he finally said. "Not safe for you out here alone. I've got a camp set up just over that ridge. You're welcome to share my fire tonight, and tomorrow we can figure out what's next." Nora stiffened, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "I don't know you, Mr. Yates. My father taught me better than to run off with strange men." A smile tugged at the corner of Drake's mouth. "Your father sounds like a wise man, but I'm offering shelter, not impropriety. You can keep my pistol by your side all night if it makes you feel safer." He pulled out his revolver and extended it to her, handle first. Nora looked at the gun, then back at the ruins of her home. The truth was, she had nowhere else to go, and the thought of spending the night alone with only the ashes of her past for company was unbearable. "Very well," she said, accepting the pistol. "But just for tonight." Drake nodded, picking up her small bundle of salvaged belongings. "Just for tonight," he agreed. As they walked away from the smoldering ruins, Nora felt a hollowness in her chest. 22 years of memories reduced to cinders. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but at least she wouldn't face the night alone. Drake's camp was simple, but well organized. A small fire burned within a ring of stones, and his bedroll was neatly laid out beside it. A dappled gray horse was tethered nearby, munching contentedly on the prairie grass. "That's Thunder," Drake said, nodding toward the horse. "Best companion a man could ask for out here." Nora approached the animal cautiously, reaching out a hand. Thunder sniffed her palm, then nudged it gently. Despite everything, she found herself smiling. "He likes you," Drake observed, laying out a second bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. "Most ladies I've met are afraid of horses." "I'm not most ladies," Nora replied, stroking Thunder's velvet nose. "Pa taught me to ride almost before I could walk." The memory stung fresh, and she turned away, blinking back tears. Drake busied himself with preparing a simple meal, giving her the space to compose herself. "Hope you don't mind jerky and beans," he said. "Not much for fancy cooking on the trail." "It's fine," Nora said, settling down by the fire. She kept his revolver within reach, though she was beginning to doubt she'd need it. There was something about Drake Yates that put her at ease despite her circumstances. As they ate, Nora studied him across the flickering flames. He wasn't what she'd expected of a cowboy. His clothes, though dusty from the trail, were of good quality. He spoke well, without the rough edges she'd heard from most of the ranch hands who'd worked for her father. "What brings you to these parts, Mr. Yates?" she asked. Drake took a sip from his tin cup. "I'm headed to Fort Benton. Got a job waiting there with the Montana Cattle Company." "You're a rancher?" "Among other things," he replied. "I've driven cattle from Texas to Montana, worked as a scout for the Army, even tried my hand at prospecting for a spell." He looked up at her. "What about you? What will you do now?" Nora set down her plate, her appetite suddenly gone. "I don't know," she admitted. "The ranch was mortgaged to the bank in Helena. With Pa gone, I doubt they'll let me keep it, even if there was anything left to keep." "You have skills, though," Drake pointed out. "You're educated, aren't you? I can tell by your speech." Nora nodded. "Ma insisted on it. Said just because we lived in the wilderness didn't mean we had to be wild ourselves." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I could teach, I suppose. Or work as a shop girl in Helena." Drake was quiet for a moment. "Fort Benton's growing fast," he said finally. "They're in need of a schoolteacher, last I heard." "Are you suggesting I come with you to Fort Benton?" Nora asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I'm suggesting it's an option," Drake said carefully. "Better than staying here with nothing but ghosts." Nora looked up at the star-filled sky, considering his words. The thought of leaving the only home she'd known for the last 15 years was terrifying, but what choice did she have? Stay and watch as the bank took what little remained of her father's dream? "I'll think about it," she said softly. Drake nodded, not pushing further. "Get some rest, Miss Lawson. Dawn comes early out here." As Nora settled into the borrowed bedroll, she kept Drake's pistol close. Not because she feared him any longer, but because it was the only thing anchoring her to this new, uncertain reality. Her life, as she knew it truly, was over. Whether what came next would be better or worse remained to be seen. Morning brought a clarity Nora hadn't expected. As she watched Drake prepare coffee over the rekindled fire, she made her decision. "I'll go with you to Fort Benton," she announced. "If they need a teacher, I'll apply for the position." Drake looked up, his blue eyes evaluating her. "It's a 4-day ride, at least." "I can ride," Nora said firmly. A slow smile spread across Drake's face. "I don't doubt it, Miss Lawson. But we'll need to get you a horse. Can't have you riding double with me all the way to Fort Benton." They rode into the small town of Clearwater later that morning. It was little more than a general store, a saloon, and a handful of buildings huddled together as if for protection against the vast Montana wilderness. The livery stable owner, a grizzled man named Harlow, eyed Nora suspiciously when Drake explained they needed a mount for her. "What happened to the Lawson place?" he asked. "Saw smoke yesterday." "Fire," Nora answered simply, not wanting to elaborate on her personal tragedy to a near stranger. Harlow grunted.
"Shame."
"Your pa was a good man. Honest." He led them to a stall where a chestnut mare stood. "This one's gentle but strong. 5 years old and trail broken." After some negotiation, Drake handed over the agreed-upon sum. Nora started to protest. She had a little money saved, hidden in the lining of her dress, but Drake waved her off. "Consider it a loan," he said quietly. "You can pay me back when you're settled in Fort Benton." They purchased supplies at the general store, food for the journey, a canvas tarpaulin for shelter, and a few necessities for Nora, who had escaped the fire with little more than the clothes on her back. As they were about to leave town, a portly man in a well-cut suit called out to them. "Miss Lawson, a moment, please." Nora recognized him as Mr. Finch, the bank manager from Helena who occasionally visited the ranch to discuss business with her father. "Mr. Finch," she acknowledged coolly. "Terrible business about the fire," he said, though his expression held little sympathy. "I've come to inform you that First Bank of Helena will be claiming the Lawson property, as per the terms of your father's mortgage." "The land is still there, Mr. Finch," Nora replied. "The house may be gone, but the property is no longer your concern," Finch interrupted. "Your father was 3 months behind on payments. The bank is within its rights." Drake stepped forward. "The lady just lost her parents and her home, sir. Perhaps this discussion could wait." Finch's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Drake Yates, a friend of Miss Lawson's." "Well, Mr. Yates, this is bank business." Finch turned back to Nora. "I'll need you to sign these papers, acknowledging the transfer of the property." Nora felt a surge of anger. "And if I refuse?" "Then the matter will go to court, where you will surely lose, after spending what little money you have on legal fees." Finch's smile was thin. "Be sensible, Miss Lawson." Drake placed a steadying hand on Nora's shoulder. "Sign the papers," he advised quietly. "Some battles aren't worth fighting." With trembling hands, Nora signed the documents Finch presented. Each stroke of the pen felt like another piece of her heart breaking. "Very good," Finch said, tucking the papers into his case. "The bank wishes you well in your future endeavors." With a tip of his hat, he waddled away. "I hate him," Nora whispered, watching Finch's retreating form. "Men like that aren't worth your hatred," Drake said. "They feed on it." He helped her mount the chestnut mare. "Ready to leave Clearwater behind?" Nora took one last look at the town, knowing that somewhere beyond it lay the ashes of her former life. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." The first day on the trail passed mostly in silence. Nora was lost in her thoughts, grieving for her parents and the home she'd lost. Drake respected her need for quiet, focusing on finding them a suitable campsite before nightfall. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Drake finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Your mother, what was she like?" Nora looked up, surprised by the personal query. "She was beautiful," she said softly. "Not just in appearance, though she was that too. She had a way of making everything around her better, brighter." She smiled at a memory. She used to sing while she worked. Said music made the chores go faster. "And your father?" "Strong. Stubborn." Nora laughed. "He was determined to tame this wild country, to carve out a place for us. Ma said he was the most hard-headed man she'd ever met, but she loved him for it." Her smile faded. "I think that's why she couldn't go on without him. They were 2 parts of a whole." Drake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My parents were like that. When my father died, my mother followed within the year. The doctor called it pneumonia, but I always believed it was a broken heart." "You understand then," Nora said quietly.
Ido.
Drake poked at the fire with a stick. "It's why I've been on the move ever since. Never staying in one place too long." "You're running." Drake looked up, surprised by her directness. "Maybe I am." "From what?" He was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. "From ending up like them, I suppose," he finally said. "Loving someone so much that losing them destroys you." Nora considered his words. "That's a lonely way to live." "Says the woman who just lost everything," Drake replied, though there was no malice in his tone. "I lost my home and my family," Nora corrected. "Not everything." She met his gaze across the fire. "Not yet." The next morning brought a change in weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a chill wind swept across the prairie. "Storm's coming," Drake observed as they packed up camp. "We'll need to find shelter before it hits." They rode hard through the morning, the chestnut mare keeping pace with thunder. Nora was grateful for the animal's smooth gait and steady temperament as the first fat raindrops began to fall. By midday, the storm had intensified. Rain lashed at them mercilessly, and thunder boomed overhead. Drake pointed to a rocky outcropping in the distance. There, he shouted over the wind. Might be a cave or at least an overhang. They urged their horses forward, both animals eager to escape the deluge. As they drew closer, Nora saw that Drake had been right. There was a shallow cave cut into the rock face, just large enough to shelter them and the horses. They dismounted quickly, leading the animals inside. The cave was dry and, while not deep, offered enough protection from the elements. Drake immediately set about creating a small fire using dry wood he'd packed that morning, anticipating the storm. Nora wrung out her soaked hair, shivering in her wet clothes. Will the storm pass quickly, do you think? Drake glanced outside at the darkened sky.
Hard to say.
These prairie storms can last hours or days. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a spare shirt.
Here.
It's dry at least. Nora hesitated, but practicality won out over modesty. Turn around, she instructed. Drake obliged, facing the cave wall as she quickly changed into his shirt. It was far too large, hanging almost to her knees, but it was blessedly dry. You can turn back now, she said, spreading her dress near the fire to dry. Drake's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his shirt, but he quickly composed himself. Better? Much. Nora settled herself by the fire, warming her hands. Thank you. Outside, the storm raged on, rain pounding against the rocky landscape. Inside the cave, a different kind of tension was building. Nora was acutely aware of Drake's presence, of the way his eyes occasionally lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. Tell me about Fort Benton, she said, breaking the silence. What's it like? Drake seemed relieved by the question. It's growing fast. Used to be just a fur trading post, but now it's the head of navigation on the Missouri River. Steamboats come up from St. Louis, bringing supplies and people. He smiled. They call it the Chicago of the Plains, though that's a bit of an exaggeration. And they need a teacher? Last I heard. The town's full of families now, not just traders and trappers. They've built a proper schoolhouse and everything. Nora tried to picture herself there, teaching the children of frontiersmen and river traders. It was a far cry from the quiet ranch life she'd known, but perhaps that was for the best. A fresh start. What about you? She asked. What will you do there? The Montana Cattle Company is expanding, Drake explained. They need experienced men to manage the new herds. Good pay, steady work. He poked at the fire. Might even save enough to get my own spread someday. No more wandering? Drake looked thoughtful. Maybe it's time to stop running. Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Nora felt a flutter in her chest, a sensation she'd never experienced before. It both thrilled and frightened her. The moment was broken by a particularly loud crack of thunder that made both horses stamp nervously. Drake rose to calm them, murmuring soothing words until they settled. When he returned to the fire, the mood had shifted. They spoke of practical matters, the route ahead, the weather, the supplies they'd need to restock in the next town. Yet underneath the ordinary conversation, Nora sensed a current of awareness, an electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. As night fell, the rain continued unabated. They would have to spend the night in the cave. You should take the bedroll, Drake said, arranging it near the fire. I'll be fine with the saddle blanket. Nora frowned. That hardly seems fair. We could. She trailed off, suddenly aware of what she was about to suggest. Drake raised an eyebrow. We could what, Miss Lawson? Share, she finished, her cheeks warming. The bedroll is large enough, and it's foolish for one of us to be uncomfortable when we don't have to be. Drake studied her face, his expression unreadable. Are you certain that's proper? Nothing about my current situation is proper, Mr. Yates, Nora replied with a hint of defiance. I'm traveling unchaperoned with a man I barely know, wearing a shirt and sleeping in a cave. I think propriety is the least of my concerns. A slow smile spread across Drake's face. When you put it that way. He arranged the bedroll to accommodate them both, careful to leave a respectful distance between their positions. As they settled in for the night, Nora was intensely aware of Drake's presence beside her. Though they weren't touching, she could feel the warmth of his body, hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was both comforting and unsettling. "Good night, Miss Lawson," Drake said quietly. "Nora," she corrected. "If we're going to share a bedroll, I think you can call me Nora." She could hear the smile in his voice when he replied, "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Drake," she whispered back, surprised by how natural his name felt on her lips. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Nora. She lay awake, listening to the rain outside and Drake's even breathing beside her. Her mind raced with thoughts of the future, of Fort Benton and the new life awaiting her there, and increasingly, of the man sleeping next to her. 3 days ago, she'd had a home and a family. Now she had nothing but the clothes on her back and the company of a stranger who was rapidly becoming something more. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, it filled her with a strange sense of anticipation. Perhaps Drake had been right after all. Perhaps her life wasn't over, it was only beginning. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a washed, clean world. Puddles dotted the prairie, reflecting the clear blue sky above. Nora stepped out of the cave, breathing in the fresh, rain-scented air. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Drake said, coming to stand beside her.
This is what I love about the West.
No matter how bad the storm, the sky always clears eventually. Nora glanced at him, struck by the metaphor. "Is that your philosophy on life as well?" "I suppose it is," he admitted with a smile. "Though some storms are harder to weather than others." They broke camp efficiently, working together as if they'd been traveling companions for years rather than days. Nora's dress had dried overnight, and she changed back into it, returning Drake's shirt with a murmured thanks. As they continued their journey toward Fort Benton, the landscape began to change. The rolling prairie gave way to more rugged terrain, with rocky outcroppings and stands of pine trees breaking the horizon. "We're getting into the foothills," Drake explained. "Fort Benton lies in a valley beyond them." They made good time that day, despite the muddy trail. By nightfall, they had reached a small settlement called Rivercross, little more than a trading post, and a few scattered buildings. "Best we get a proper roof over our heads tonight," Drake suggested. "There's a boarding house here that's clean, if not fancy." The boarding house was run by a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Porter, who eyed Nora and Drake with obvious suspicion. "We need 2 rooms," Drake said firmly. Mrs. Porter sniffed. "Only got 1 left. Take it or leave it." Drake looked at Nora, who nodded slightly. After sharing a cave and a bedroll, a room in a boarding house seemed positively luxurious, regardless of the arrangements. "We'll take it," Drake said. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rickety chair. Drake immediately offered to sleep on the floor. "Don't be ridiculous," Nora said. "The bed is perfectly adequate for both of us, and you need proper rest as much as I do." When he hesitated, she added, "We managed well enough in the cave, didn't we?" Drake couldn't argue with that logic, though his expression suggested he might have wanted to. They ventured back downstairs for a simple but filling dinner of venison stew and cornbread. The dining room was occupied by a handful of other travelers, most of whom paid them little attention. One man, however, watched them with interest. He was expensively dressed, with a gold watch chain visible across his waistcoat and rings adorning his fingers. When Nora and Drake had finished their meal, he approached their table. "Pardon the intrusion," he said smoothly. "I couldn't help but notice the lady's distinctive auburn hair. You wouldn't happen to be related to Joseph Lawson, would you?" Nora stiffened. "He was my father." The man's face lit up. "I thought so. The resemblance is remarkable. Henry Caldwell at your service." He gave a slight bow. Your father and I did business together some years ago. Drake watched the exchange with cautious eyes. What kind of business, Mr. Caldwell? Land investments, primarily, Caldwell replied. Joseph had a good eye for promising properties. He turned back to Nora. I was deeply saddened to hear of his passing. And now I understand. The ranch has been lost as well. Word travels fast, Nora said stiffly. It's a small territory, Miss Lawson. News tends to spread. Caldwell pulled up a chair, uninvited. I hope you don't think me presumptuous, but I may have information that could be of interest to you. Drake's posture tensed. What kind of information? Caldwell lowered his voice. Your father entrusted me with certain documents before his death. I believe he suspected the bank might try to claim his property. He glanced around the dining room before continuing. The mortgage agreement contained a clause that in the event of Joseph's death, his heir would have 6 months to settle the outstanding debt before the property could be seized. Nora's heart raced. But Mr. Finch said, Finch is counting on your ignorance of the legal details, Caldwell interrupted. The bank is in a hurry to acquire your father's land because there's been a significant discovery nearby. What kind of discovery? Drake asked. Gold, Caldwell said simply. A small vein, but promising enough to drive up the value of surrounding properties considerably. Nora's mind reeled. If what Caldwell said was true, the bank had essentially stolen her inheritance through deception. I have the original mortgage document in my room, Caldwell continued. You're welcome to examine it yourself. Drake placed a protective hand on Nora's arm. Why would her father give such important papers to you instead of leaving them with Nora? Caldwell smiled thinly. Joseph and I had an arrangement. I was to look after certain interests in the event of his untimely death. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. This is a copy of a letter he wrote to me last year. It may help explain. Nora took the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's. Henry, should anything happen to me before Nora comes of age, I trust you to ensure she receives what is rightfully hers. The bank has been pressing for early payment, and I suspect their motives aren't entirely honest. The documents in your possession may be her only protection. With gratitude, Joseph Lawson, tears welled in Nora's eyes. This is dated last spring. He never said anything to me about troubles with the bank. He wouldn't have wanted to worry you, Caldwell said gently. Joseph was a proud man. Drake studied Caldwell intently. What do you gain from helping Miss Lawson? A fair question, Caldwell acknowledged. Your father and I had a partnership agreement. In exchange for my legal assistance, I would receive a 20% interest in any mineral rights discovered on the property. He straightened his waistcoat. I stand to benefit if you reclaim your land, Miss Lawson. I make no secret of that. Nora looked to Drake, uncertain. What do you think? Drake considered for a moment. I think we should see the original mortgage document before making any decisions. Caldwell nodded approvingly. A wise precaution. I have it in my room. Shall we? They followed Caldwell upstairs to his quarters, which were considerably more spacious than their own. From a leather portfolio, he produced several legal documents, which he spread out on a small table. Here, he said, pointing to a clause in the mortgage agreement. In the event of the mortgager's death, his legal heir shall have 6 months to settle any outstanding balance before foreclosure proceedings may commence. Nora read the words carefully, recognizing her father's signature at the bottom of the page. This means the bank had no right to make me sign those papers. Precisely, Caldwell said. Finch was counting on your emotional distress and legal ignorance to gain control of the property quickly and quietly. Drake examined the document closely. This appears legitimate. What do you propose, Mr. Caldwell? A telegram to the territorial judge in Helena would be the first step, Caldwell replied, followed by formal legal action against First Bank of Helena for fraudulent practices. He looked at Nora. It will take time and some legal maneuvering, but with these documents, I believe we can recover your property. Nora's mind was spinning. Yesterday, she had been resigned to starting a new life in Fort Benton, leaving her past behind. Now, suddenly, there was a chance to reclaim her inheritance, but at what cost? I need time to think, she said finally. Caldwell nodded understandingly. Of course. It's a significant decision. He gathered the documents carefully. I'll be in Rivercross for 2 more days before continuing to Helena. You can give me your answer before I leave. After thanking Caldwell, Nora and Drake returned to their room in silence. Once the door was closed, Drake turned to her. Do you trust him? He asked directly. Nora sank onto the edge of the bed. I don't know. The letter was definitely in my father's hand, and the mortgage document seemed genuine. She looked up at him. What do you think? Drake paced the small room. Caldwell stands to gain considerably if there's gold on your land. That makes his motive suspect, but it also gives him reason to help you genuinely. He stopped, facing her. The question is, what do you want, Nora? She was quiet for a long moment. 2 days ago, I was ready to leave everything behind. To start fresh in Fort Benton. She met his gaze. With you, if I'm being honest. Drake's expression softened. And now? Now I don't know, Nora admitted. If there's a chance to reclaim what's rightfully mine, shouldn't I take it? Drake sat beside her on the bed. Only you can answer that. But know this, whatever you decide, you won't face it alone. He took her hand gently. I'll go with you to Helena, if that's what you choose. Or to Fort Benton. Or anywhere else you want to go. Nora looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the dim lamplight, his eyes were dark and sincere. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for me? You barely know me. Drake's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I know enough, he said softly. I know you're brave and resilient. I know you face adversity with grace. And I know that since I found you standing before that burning ranch, I haven't been able to think about much else besides you. Nora's heart hammered in her chest. Drake. You don't have to say anything, he assured her quickly. I just wanted you to know that whatever path you choose, I'd be honored to walk it with you. If you'll have me. In answer, Nora leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. It was a brief kiss, chaste and sweet, but it sent warmth coursing through her entire body. When she pulled back, Drake looked stunned. What was that for? For being the one good thing to come out of the worst days of my life, she answered simply. He smiled, the most genuine smile she'd seen from him yet. Get some rest, Nora. You've got a big decision to make tomorrow. But as they settled into the narrow bed that night, backs carefully turned to each other despite the intimacy of their earlier conversation, Nora found that her decision was already made. She just needed the morning light to be sure. At breakfast, she announced her intention to both Drake and Caldwell, who had joined them at their table. I want to fight for my land, she said firmly. Not just because of the gold, but because it's what my father would have wanted. He built that ranch from nothing. I can't let it go without a fight. Caldwell nodded approvingly. I'll send a telegram to Judge Wilson today. We should be in Helena within the week to file the formal complaint against the bank. Drake squeezed her hand under the table. I'm proud of you, he murmured. The journey to Helena took them in the opposite direction of Fort Benton, following the Missouri River southward. Caldwell traveled with them, explaining the legal process ahead and preparing Nora for what to expect. Banking laws in the territories are still developing, he explained as they rode. That works both for and against us. On one hand, there's less precedent to guide the court. On the other, judges tend to favor homesteaders over financial institutions in cases of dispute. Helena was larger than Nora remembered from her infrequent childhood visits. The gold rush of the 1860s had transformed it from a mining camp to a proper city, with brick buildings lining Last Chance Gulch and the impressive facade of the territorial courthouse dominating the main street. Judge Wilson received them in his chambers the day after their arrival. He was an imposing figure with a thick white beard and penetrating eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they said. "These are serious allegations against First Bank of Helena," he said after hearing Caldwell's presentation. "Mr. Finch is a respected member of the business community." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Caldwell replied smoothly. "The documentation speaks for itself." Miss Lawson was coerced into signing away her property rights while in a state of extreme distress and without being informed of the 6-month grace period clearly stated in the original mortgage agreement. The judge examined the papers carefully. "I see. And you believe there may be mineral deposits on the property that motivated this hasty acquisition?" "There have been promising finds in the adjacent areas," Caldwell confirmed. "We believe the bank was aware of this when they pressured Miss Lawson." Judge Wilson turned his attention to Nora. "Young lady, did Mr. Finch explicitly tell you that you had no choice but to sign over the property immediately?" Nora straightened in her chair. "Yes, Your Honor. He said that if I didn't sign, the matter would go to court where I would surely lose and waste what little money I had on legal fees." The judge's bushy eyebrows drew together. "I see." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I'm issuing a temporary injunction preventing the bank from developing or selling the Lawson property until this matter is resolved. We'll have a formal hearing in 2 weeks' time." He fixed Nora with a stern look. "Be prepared, Miss Lawson. Mr. Finch and the bank will not take this challenge lightly." The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Nora stayed at a respectable boarding house for women, while Drake and Caldwell took rooms at a nearby hotel. Each day, they met to review strategy and prepare Nora for her testimony. During this time, Nora saw a different side of Drake. His knowledge of legal matters surprised her, as did his shrewd insights into the bank's likely countermoves. "You know a lot about banking law for a cowboy," she observed one evening as they reviewed documents in the boarding house parlor. Drake smiled wryly. "Before I came west, I worked for my uncle's law practice in St. Louis.
Wasn't suited for it, though."
Too much sitting, not enough sky." Nora stared at him. "You're a lawyer?" He corrected. "Never took the bar examination. But I learned enough to know when someone's trying to cheat honest folks out of what's theirs." This revelation only deepened Nora's growing feelings for Drake. Each day spent in his company confirmed what her heart had known almost from the beginning. She was falling in love with him. The day of the hearing arrived clear and cold. Nora wore her best dress, a navy blue wool that Mrs. Kettering, the boarding house owner, had helped alter to fit her properly. Drake met her at the courthouse steps, looking uncharacteristically formal in a clean suit and polished boots. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "And you look like a lawyer," she replied with a nervous smile. He laughed. "Don't hold that against me." Inside the courtroom, Mr. Finch was already seated with his attorney, a sharp-faced man named Barrow, who was known as one of the territory's most aggressive litigators. Finch's expression darkened when he saw Nora, and he leaned over to whisper something to Barrow. Judge Wilson called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Barrow presented the bank's case first, arguing that Nora had willingly signed the transfer documents and was now experiencing seller's remorse due to rumors of gold. When it was Caldwell's turn, he methodically dismantled the bank's position, producing the original mortgage with its 6-month clause highlighted prominently. He called Nora to testify about her state of mind following her parents' deaths and the fire, and how Finch had pressured her into immediate action. Miss Lawson had just lost everything, Caldwell emphasized to the judge. Her parents, her home, her sense of security. In that vulnerable state, she was deliberately misled by Mr. Finch, who was well aware of the 6-month provision, but chose to conceal it. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Caldwell called the Clearwater General Store owner, Mr. Hopkins, as a witness. Hopkins testified that he had overheard Finch boasting to another bank official about the golden opportunity, they'd secured by getting the Lawson property for a song before news of the nearby strike became public. By the end of the day, the judge's decision seemed inevitable. He ruled in Nora's favor, invalidating the transfer documents and restoring her ownership of the ranch property. Furthermore, he ordered First Bank of Helena to pay damages for their deceptive practices. Outside the courthouse, Nora could hardly believe their victory. "It's really mine again," she said wonderingly. Drake smiled. "Your father would be proud." Caldwell approached, looking pleased. "Congratulations, Miss Lawson. I've taken the liberty of arranging for a surveyor to assess the potential gold deposits on your property. As per our agreement, I'll handle the negotiations with any mining interests." Nora nodded, suddenly thoughtful. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. But I need to consider what happens next carefully." That evening, Nora and Drake walked along the quieter streets of Helena, discussing the future. "The ranch house is gone," Nora said. "I'd need to rebuild. Start over completely." "You could sell," Drake suggested. "With the gold potential, you'd get a good price. Enough to start fresh wherever you wanted." Nora stopped walking, turning to face him. "Where would you start fresh if you could choose anywhere?" Drake looked surprised by the question. "I thought I knew. Fort Benton seemed like a good place to settle down." He took her hands in his. "But now I'm thinking the location matters less than the company I keep." Nora's heart raced. "Drake Yates, are you saying what I think you're saying?" He stepped closer. "When I found you by that burning ranch, I told you your life wasn't over, that it was only beginning. I didn't know then how true those words would be for both of us." His blue eyes held hers intently. "I love you, Nora Lawson. I know it's fast and maybe foolish, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Tears welled in Nora's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first night by the campfire." Drake's kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left Nora breathless. When they finally parted, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "So what now?" she asked softly. Drake's arms tightened around her. "That depends on you. We could go to Fort Benton as planned, or rebuild your ranch, or sell it all and start somewhere new." He kissed the top of her head. "As long as we're together, I don't much care where we end up." Nora thought about it for a moment, then looked up at him with a smile. "I have an idea." 6 months later, the newly built Lawson Yates ranch house stood where the old one had burned down. It was larger and sturdier than the original, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides and tall windows to catch the Montana light. The gold find on the property had proven modest but profitable, enough to fund the new construction and establish a small herd of cattle. Drake's experience with the Montana Cattle Company had proven invaluable as they developed the ranch into a promising operation. On a clear autumn day, friends and neighbors gathered to witness Drake and Nora exchange vows on the front porch of their new home. Mr. Caldwell, now their business partner, stood proudly among the guests, as did Judge Wilson, who had been impressed enough by Drake's legal acumen to encourage him to take the territorial bar examination. As the celebration continued into the evening, Drake found Nora standing alone at the edge of the property, looking out over the rolling landscape that stretched to the distant mountains. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Yates?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Nora leaned back against him, savoring the solidity of his presence. "Not one," she assured him. "Just thinking about how much has changed in less than a year. For the better, I hope?" She turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. "Beyond anything I could have imagined that day when I thought my life was over." Drake smiled, the same smile that had given her hope when she'd had none. "I told you it was only beginning." As the sun set over their land, casting long shadows across the Montana prairie, Nora knew with absolute certainty that this new beginning was everything she could have wished for and more. The path ahead might not always be easy, but with Drake by her side, she was ready to face whatever the future held. Her life hadn't ended in those flames. It had been forged anew, stronger and more beautiful than before. And it was indeed only beginning.